Welcome to the Responsible Negotiation Podcast, produced by the DC Mediation and Dispute Resolution Institute. I am your host, Francis Ojok. Here at the Institute, we prevent, manage, resolve, and transform conflict into an opportunity for positive change using mediation and other appropriate dispute resolution mechanisms. Visit our website to learn more or contact us at info@dcmediationinstitute.com and let us know how we can work with you or collaborate with you. Without further ado, let's get to the show. Today, with great honor and privilege, I am delighted to welcome our distinguished speaker, Lynn Cole, who will present on intercultural skills for conflict resolution. Lynn is the president of the law offices of Lynn Cole. She is the founder and CEO of the Bridges Academy, which is an acronym for Building Resolutions for Dispute Globally with E-Learning Strategies. Without wasting any time, let me invite Lynn to take the center stage and lead us through this engaging exploration of intercultural skills for dispute resolution. Lynn, the platform is yours.
Francis, thank you very much for that. That's very kind of you. I appreciate that. I have known Francis for a couple of years. I think very highly of him, and I'm very excited about the institute that you all have started in DC. You know that I've trained around the world, and I was in the Hong Kong airport and I saw this bank, big bank ad, and it had a big green grasshopper on it. That kind of stayed with me because from a Western country, I couldn't figure out why a bank would want a grasshopper as a symbol of its banking business. Well, as it turns out, it led me to ask, oh, why grasshopper? So I found out a grasshopper in the Americas and Australia and Canada, for example, even in parts of the EU, is looked at very much as a pest. But in Thailand, the grasshopper is a delicious appetizer. And in China, believe it or not, it's even a pet. So you can see right there, just in little things like that, how different things you can react to them. What we're going to do today is talk about culture. We're going to talk about the intercultural skills critically needed. And then lastly, I'll go over very quickly with you some of the knowledge and skills to become interculturally adept. Most people think that culture is dancing or food or clothes. It is much, much deeper than that. It's your core values. It's your knowledge. It's how you acquire your knowledge. It's your life's views. It's how you think about life. And it's important how you view time. It differs in rules and responsibilities. Culture is a deeply conditioned and collective programming of the mind. It's a cultivated behavior, an indoctrination, and a way of life as a society. And it's a conditioning of patterns and explicit and implicit influences of these patterns. In short, it's the total sum of learned behavior shared by generations. Again, what is culture? Well, culture and the study of it is very new, actually. It started way back, maybe 20 years ago, which is very young for a science, where Hofstede studied different cultures and came up with some cultural dimensions. But more recently, they have come to find out there's a different, absolutely different, actually, hypothesis of the brain and culture. And it goes something like this, that the real driver of the expansion of the human brain was a growing cumulative body of cultural information. You know, in the last few million years, the human brain has more than tripled in size. People and scientists have wondered why that has happened. What has been the causes of that? Well, the cultural brain hypothesis posits that our brains, have been selected for their ability to store and manage information acquired through asocial and social learning. This narrow evolutionary pathway created by cumulative cultural evolutionary knowledge may help to explain the rapid expansion of our human brain. Because of that, because we were good at storing and transmitting information, the brain started taking up a lot of the energy in our bodies. And actually, in accordance with this hypothesis, it affected the change in our bodies as our brains grew larger, our stomachs grew smaller, our teeth grew smaller, and it also even altered the internal intestine lengths of our intestines. Something else is new in culture. It's called cultural neuroscience. This particular aspect of neuroscience, cultural science, is only like 5 years old. What they're doing is they're using MRI to take brain patterns and do studies. And I won't go into a lot of it, but what has been found, for one example, is that when an American thinks about whether he is honest, his brain activity looks very different than when he thinks about whether another person is honest. But when they did the same brain imaging for a Chinese person, his brain showed something very different. When he evaluated whether he was honest, his brain activity looked almost identical to when he was thinking about whether his mother is honest. And the scientists have hypothesized that this kind of imaging shows a difference in cultures, namely individualistic versus collectivist cultures. Bottom line is, we're on the edge of a huge change in opening the gates of culture to provide new visions to us as humanity and to our societies based on this kind of knowledge and how our brain works. It's very exciting. I want to mention acculturation because Bridge's mission is to build intercultural skills with conflict resolvers around the world, but our vision, humbly, is to be a small part of building a world culture of peace. To do that, it's my belief that we need to acculturate. And that means when we have assimilations between cultures, that there is a respect, that there is a learning process that goes on, that there is a kind curiosity between the cultures, and that new ideas are assimilated and respected and kept alive by both the inculcated and the main culture. You know, culture also has its subcultures, like cultural stereotyping and cultural ethnocentrism. Unfortunately, we're seeing a lot of that these days, aren't we? And regrettably, we're seeing a lot of it in our politics. Here in the United States, if I might say so, I see a whole lot of stereotyping going on, quote, immigrants, in quotes. Human beings who come from very different paths of lives and very different cultures, who have very different things to offer as a member of society. Hopefully, we can move more towards acculturation than cultural stereotyping or cultural ethnocentrism, where you believe that your culture is better than others. So let's take a look today at what we mean by intercultural skills. So a quick answer is this: the effective transmission of messages and priorities from members of one culture or social group to others. Research suggests that the way in which each of us thinks and acts at work, at play, in families, can be influenced by the attitudes and values in the cultures to which we belong. And when we come in contact with people from different cultural backgrounds, we can sometimes encounter behaviors that don't match our own assumptions, or they don't match our expectations. And as a result, there can be misinterpretations, incorrect assumptions, confusions, misunderstandings. One of our goals in learning intercultural skills is to make sure those things don't happen. Why are intercultural skills no longer optional? A lot of reasons. But let me tell you why I think, from a personal perspective in my own studies, in my reading of the news and being a historian by training, why I think they're no longer optional. It's not just that there's a rapid expansion of international commercial disputes without litigation, huge expansion of commercial transactions not tied to national boundaries. And by the way, This goes for both large and small businesses. In Bridges Academy, we work with an Indian webmaster. They produce stuff for us. I look at it the next morning. And also business extend over longer periods of time with more complexities. Oh, sure, international business transactions, all types of cooperative ventures. And that these happen in different countries and between different cultures, all among diverse cultures and countries with political instabilities, sometimes in countries with wildly fluctuating economic variables, and maybe certainly with conflicting ideologies. But I mentioned why I thought it was particularly important. I believe that the pace of our learning is rapidly increasing, and that climate change is rapidly advancing, and that our societies and our governments are not doing enough in time to stop what I believe will be massive immigrations. There will be famines caused by flooding or lack of water. And from that, people will flee to areas where they can eat and survive. It's going to happen. And we have to be prepared as people in our cultures to accept people from other cultures and to learn from them and be more open and more curious. And especially if, as mediators and conflict resolvers, we need to transcend these cultural barriers. And the need to do so with culture, climate, and rapid advancing changes in the culture, which will cause many, many more migrations, they will need mediators' help to do that, our help to do that. Intercultural skills encompasses a cultural training which is national versus regional, religious views, linguistic variables, gender treatment, age treatment, generational treatments, class and norm, and ethical preferences. These are all things that we're going to be learning about from different cultures as we assimilate with them, as we acculturate. Why do we particularly need this as mediators? Why did I start Bridges Academy? Just as a quick reminder, it's because, as Frances said, I was able to work with USAID as a mediation specialist years back. And I lived and worked in Bulgaria, Kosovo, Jordan, and Sri Lanka. I can tell you, friends, that at that time, I did everything I could to learn about the culture of the country. And I could learn a lot about trade, and about economics, and about demographics, but I couldn't learn much about their culture. And I didn't understand how to learn about their culture. So I decided that we needed to do that intercultural skills and we as mediators learning them are no longer optional. Because as I said, cultural traits in cultural communications can be misinterpreted. And we as mediators need to understand that and help the parties through those possible misinterpretations and misunderstandings and avoid offenses and hurt feelings simply because of a misunderstanding of a cultural view. So for us as mediators, the question is not how to help others become aware of their cultural based on limitations, based upon limitations. Rather, how to discover cultural overlaps, cultural issues, and common assets. And believe me, they're there. Today, I want to give us some time to talk about, ask some questions. And I could go on and on because I teach intercultural skills and I teach the cultural dimensions class. The cultural dimensions class is what I call our academic course. It talks about knowledge, and I touched on that a little bit at the very beginning with the new evolutionary theory of culture and the new scientific approach to culture. But we also study the skill set. We study self-awareness and emotional intelligence. How do mediators handle that? We talk about how to prepare and manage the multicultural mediation or the multicultural environment, even in workplaces with HR people. And we teach about intercultural communications. In terms of cultural dimensions, Hofstadter was the one who, as I said, about 20, maybe 30 years ago at most, came up with a model to predict the dimensions of culture. And these are the ones that he talked about. I'm not going to go into any of them today, but I wanted to just talk briefly, just briefly, about one of them to give you an example of what he means by his cultural dimension. It's the one I mentioned earlier, collectivism versus individualism, when I talked to you about the brain imaging they're doing between members of different societies and how their brain patterns differ in questions regarding themselves and family. So in that example, the brain image of the man from China had a very different brain image because he had a different thought pattern, which included not only himself in trust, but his mother. Whereas the American whose brain was imaged thought very much only about individualism. These truly are very different aspects of culture in society. And it's one we talk about and learn about in cultural dimensions. The three skill sets we talk about are, as I said, emotional intelligence, preparing and managing the multicultural process, and intercultural communications. I'll just briefly discuss with you a little bit about emotional intelligence. From a mediator's perspective, we really need to be emotionally intelligent because we could get triggered as well in mediations. And we have to understand how we're triggered. We have to have that self-awareness. And once we are triggered, we have to stop for a moment to reflect and then next figure out how we regulate that triggering. We're only human as mediators, so we have the same problems. And if we don't understand that ourselves, how are we going to point that out to the participants of mediators when we see that exact same thing happening to them? So it gives us time to, when we learn emotional intelligence, it gives us time to adjust our responses, to keep our focus, to be more present for the parties, and to be aware of our own emotions, which may trigger our behavior and impact any of the parties either positively or negatively. Self-awareness, I really like self-awareness, so I wanted to add this slide for you, helping to prepare in advance to avoid surprises. It helps you to reestablish your self-balance. Believe it or not, one of the things that I've also found is it helped me cope with cultural ambiguities. Just as one example of this, when I was in Bulgaria, it was my first assignment to design a mediation program in Bulgaria. And I had a big meeting Monday morning. I had just arrived in Amman in Sofia the day before. We sat down at this huge table with the heads of all of the NGOs in the country. And they asked me a question, and I was delighted to answer yes. And I said yes, and they started laughing at me. And I'm sure my face got a little red. And my colleague, who was my partner in the program, said, this means no, and this means yes in Bulgaria. Similar things can happen like that in your mediations, and you need to be able to anticipate them and know how to deal with them. I just got red-faced and learned how to say thank you in Bulgarian, Blagodaria. Managing the process is really important. When we certify our intercultural candidates, we have a multicultural simulation at the end, which is a session with paid actors who act out a multicultural mediation. And then surveys are taken, and even self-surveys by the mediator, and I go over all of them, and then we have a final evaluation. But it helps you to hone your ability to recognize in others their culturally shaped behaviors and events. By doing your homework, you can manage your ambiguities, and you can avoid making mistakes. I mean, the simple mistake of timing. If you're in a mediation and there happens to be a person, a Muslim person, and it happens to be Ramadan. You want to make sure that the time for prayer is given to that person, or at least he or she is made aware that they can have access to that time as a matter of courtesy. Those are things that allow you to be sensitive and respect the party's different cultural aspects. A couple other things, just a few overview, a little bit more on an overview of managing the multicultural process. It's really important to know whether to be less directive or more facilitative, because that varies within cultures, which you would learn in cultural dimensions. You'll understand how the parties, how they are aligning with their expectations and what might be preventing that alignment because of their cultural barriers. It can assist them in taking action items. And you take into account necessary procedures and ceremonies. Couple of things on communication styles, one of my favorite subjects, I teach it. But today, I'm not going to cover all of these, like the emotional, the high and low, verbal, nonverbal, personal, impersonal, formal versus informal. Today, I just want to talk to you briefly about direct versus indirect. So the direct communication style speakers tend to say directly what they want to say. They use clear and definitive statements. They're usually very active participants in meetings. And if you've worked with Australians or Canadians or other Americans, you know that at times they make their points with fairly great conviction. So those would be the more direct countries, Western countries such as Australia, Canada, US, Germany, and Israel. That's all I'm going to say at this point. And to that end, love to take any questions that you have.
Are you ready to become the change you want to see in your community or in your workplace? If so, check out our tailored workshops and mediation skills, training, and certification designed to equip you with the practical skills to become an effective conflict resolver and a certified mediation practitioner. Now, let's get back to the show. One of the questions that I wanted to get started on is, why is it even important for me to have the cultural awareness if I already know and have all the skills to just address the dispute?
Well, it's important because a couple of reasons. I know I did it because I wanted to expand my mediation practice, and I wanted that experience. I wanted to work interculturally. And I found that people have told me that, especially the younger attorneys, there are two things. One is to have the Bridges Intercultural certificate on your resume, which gives you an automatic entry, at least, to discuss your international ambitions, and maybe global travel, that kind of thing. So it opens up, it gives you that credibility, I think.
My question is, when we talk about culture, I find two difficulties. One is there are many cultures within each culture. So it's very difficult to generalize in that respect, for example. And the other one is the individual differences. So I caught the last part of your presentation when you were talking about the cultures who are more direct, for example. Generally speaking, Middle Easterns aren't, but there are many people also in the Middle East that are quite direct. So how can you actually have a cultural check-in with the individuals rather than the big label? How do you do that?
Okay. The individuals vary immensely in each culture. And that's why I added the subparts of there can be even cults, by the way, Fatma, in not just cultural divisions, but cults within societies. Very, very different approaches to life, with spots within a society, very different from the rest of its society. So that differs that way. Secondly, it differs individually. And thirdly, culture is always evolving, particularly with our younger generation. And we strongly recommend, particularly in cultural, with any mediations involving multiple cultures, that you have pre-mediation meetings. And you don't do that with all of them. You do that individually with each individual. If they're represented by council, then you talk with the council. But if it's a community mediation or where the individuals are mediating, meet with the individual separately. Listen. And first of all, when you meet with that individual from another culture, one, be humble. Tell him that you come from a different culture. You're eager to learn about things that he would like to happen in mediation. Are there any different things that he would or she would want to happen? Those are the kinds of questions that you can get into a dialogue with an individual who's participating in your mediation who may be from another culture. So that when you do that with all your participants, you're going to get a sense of the individual and the individual's needs.
One of the things that I wanted to add when we're talking about cultural differences and how to deal with it, I learned this. I was having a mediation session sometimes back, and one of the parties said something that said no, for example. And in the basic mediation training, if somebody says no, you want to ask more questions to understand what is the motivating factors behind that no. However, in certain cultures, once the person said no, it is no. Asking to understand what is behind that no is considered disrespectful.
That is correct.
So I had no idea. I had no idea. And what I have realized from that experience is it is truly not about you, the mediator, understanding the culture, but it is about you, the mediator, respecting the culture, regardless of whether or not you understand it.
Yes, to respect it. And, when you do that, the learning comes, and it's amazing because when you begin to learn, you want to learn with that respect, then it allows you to learn openly and be non-judgmental. Another thing that's come up for me in multicultural mediations is the sense of in many societies, there obviously some that go to the extreme of caste, but your station in life is looked upon as being greater or lesser in many respects. So, for example, I'll give you one example in a major multi-million-dollar mediation that occurred between a Japanese company and an American company, huge mediation. And it went on for a year. And towards the end of the year, the Japanese agreed to this statement, and the American agreed, and the American said, "Oh, thank goodness this is over." And the Japanese said, "Oh, thank you very much. Now we will take this back to our superiors, who will see whether or not we will agree or not." The Americans went bonkers. It blew the mediation apart. Fortunately, a Japanese mediator came in, resolved it because of that difference. So it's really important to do your homework because it helps you to avoid those surprises. The surprise you might want to avoid, and it's something that I found, and I found this to be true, particularly in Sri Lanka and in Jordan, both of which I designed mediation programs in the judiciary for them, as opposed to Kosovo and Bulgaria, where they were mediation centers outside of the mediation of the judiciary. In those in Jordan and Sri Lanka, they actually had mediator judges, and it was very hard to get the participants not to look at the judges as judges and think that they should decide the issues for them. And in some cultures, just because you are the mediator, particularly also in China, where the conciliator does more than just mediation, he or she does that, but it's more than that because they suggest resolutions. In those societies, you have to be very clear about what your role is, and simply explain it in a way that people understand it, so that they don't take insult by it. No, I can't decide that for you. Can you imagine saying that to somebody who thinks that you were there to do that? So you want to avoid those kinds of differences as well.
Thank you for listening. We hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can support us by leaving a 5-star review And if you haven't already, please subscribe to this podcast to stay informed whenever we upload a new episode. See you in the next episode.